Hello, I'm Candace Pine, the visiting manuscript librarian at the Walter Havighurst Special Collections and University Archives at Miami University, and I want to welcome you to this presentation of Rise and Advocate, the Power of the Vote, where I will be discussing Dr. Carolyn Jefferson Jenkins. Dr. Jefferson Jenkins is a social historian and activist. She has broken through the glass ceiling and defied obstacles and societal barriers by serving as the first woman of African descent to serve as the national president of the League of Women Voters. She is considered to be a scholar in the areas of suffrage, education, healthcare reform, and equality and inclusion for women. This presentation will focus on Dr. Jefferson Jenkins's childhood influences, her work in the field of education, her policies and practices as president of the League of Women Voters, her achievements as an advocate for voting rights, her work to combat voter oppression and discrimination, and her support of civic engagement. The Walter Havighurst Special Collections houses Dr. Jefferson Jenkins' collection within the Western College Memorial Archives collection, and primary materials from her collection will be used throughout this presentation to illustrate her place in civil rights history. This presentation will provide you with a snapshot of her achievements through her spoken voice, quotes, and archival materials. I will begin with a brief background on Dr. Jefferson Jenkins. She was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and she went on to become a very well-educated woman. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in Social Science and Education from Western College. She also earned a Master's in Education in Administration and Supervision from John Carroll University, as well as an Education Specialist degree from Kent State University, and she earned a PhD in Urban Education and Administration from Cleveland State University. Now, let's talk about what inspired Dr. Jefferson Jenkins's career. It was Carolyn Jefferson Jenkins's grandmother, Barbara Blaine, who was a source of great inspiration and influence, particularly in regard to the issues of education and voting.
I'm the 15th president of the League of Women Voters and the first person of African American descent to serve this 80-year-old organization. And I don't come to this task without a heritage of activism. My grandmother, who just passed at age 98, was a school teacher in segregated Arkansas, and at the end of her workday after picking cotton and teaching school, taught her neighbors how to sign their names so that they could register to vote.
Witnessing her grandmother's work with these disenfranchised citizens had a great effect on Dr. Jefferson Jenkins's viewpoints, which she discussed in several newspaper interviews. In regard to how her grandmother affected her view of education, Dr. Jefferson Jenkins explained, "She made $32 a month at retirement, and half of that was used to take education classes. But I remember her passion was to see people educated. I can remember her teaching people who could only sign X's for their name how to read and write. That really inspired me. It made me want to become a teacher. That's all I ever wanted to be." And in regard to seeing people of color in particular not being allowed to vote, Dr. Jefferson Jenkins said, "It brought my attention to the dissonance of what I was told to expect as a citizen and the reality of what happened." In the end, her grandmother was not able to vote until she was 63 years old, when the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. Now I would like to touch on Dr. Jefferson Jenkins's time as an undergraduate student at Western College for Women, which has since been absorbed by Miami University. Dr. Jefferson Jenkins gave an interview to the Western College Alumni Association in 2006, where she discussed what it was like to be a Black woman attending college in the 1970s. She spoke about how a period of upheaval in our country impacted her college experience. She said, quote, "The 1970s was a much different time, I think, than now. The country was involved in a very unpopular war. Just 5 years prior to my coming here, the Civil Rights Act was passed and the Voting Rights Act was passed, so society was undergoing social and cultural changes. In 1970, just before I came to Western, there was the shooting at Kent State University, which was on everybody's mind. In 68, there were 2 assassinations of King and Kennedy, and that had a profound impact on all of us. And so, coming to Western, that not only embraced what was going on socially, but also was about making a change, was very critical to me." Dr. Jefferson Jenkins also spoke about some of the major events that occurred on campus that had a big impact on her personally. She said, quote, A couple of events that occurred while I was here that were really near and dear to my heart. At Miami, there was a ROTC building that was burned during the time that I was here. Western College organized and implemented an anti-Vietnam march that went through the center of Western College campus. There were a lot of speakers that came to campus to talk about what was going on in the Black community at the time. And one of the phrases at that time was Black power, and empowering yourself and feeling special because you are Black, not feeling inferior, but knowing you had the ability to make a difference. And so a lot of people were here trying to make a difference. And all of those experiences actually led to who I am today. It was the Western College atmosphere that allowed me to thrive and do what I'm doing. End quote. And we are very happy to hear that Dr. Jefferson Jenkins learned a lot during her time at Western College and felt that she was able to thrive there. Plus, it got her on track for the career that she wanted. Let's turn now to some of Dr. Jefferson Jenkins's early career achievements. Dr. Jefferson Jenkins began her career in 1974 teaching high school. Later, she became the assistant principal at Max S. Hayes Vocational High School, and then went on to become the principal at Taylor Academy. She also developed and implemented the Alternative Educational Opportunities Program, which was designed to help students who were at risk of dropping out of school. And on this slide here, we have a photograph from a Max S. Hayes Vocational High School yearbook that features Dr. Jefferson Jenkins at the time when she was the assistant principal. That yearbook is kept in the Carolyn Jefferson Jenkins collection that we have housed in our archives. Teaching in public schools, such as these, helped Dr. Jefferson Jenkins in writing her dissertation, which was titled An Historical Analysis of the Great Migration and the Administrative Policies and Practices of Racial Isolation in the Cleveland Public Schools, 1920 to 1940. She explains that the dissertation utilizes historiographical methodology to describe and analyze the relationship between the emergence of administrative policies and practices of racial isolation in the Cleveland City School District and the historical event known as the Great Migration. And this image here comes from a publication produced by Cleveland State University called the Cleveland State University Connection. It features a photo of Dr. Jefferson Jenkins and a full description of her dissertation. Overall, Dr. Jefferson Jenkins's work in the education field has always focused on encouraging her students. As she said, over the years, I've been a teacher, administrator, building level administrator, I've taught at the university, all with the same philosophy that I learned at Western College, that students want to do better, students want to make a difference in the world, and I need to give them the tools to do that. She also went on to say, I'm always requiring the best, always trying to raise the bar, always saying, is that your best? No, it's not. Let's try something different. But always providing resources and opportunities for people to shine. Dr. Jefferson Jenkins's philosophies as an educator are surely to be admired. Now, let's move on to Dr. Jefferson Jenkins's involvement with the League of Women Voters. First off, what is the League of Women Voters? It is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The goal of the League of Women Voters is to empower citizens to shape better communities worldwide. And how did Dr. Jefferson Jenkins get involved with the League of Women Voters? The group was sponsoring a candidate debate, and she really wanted to go. She called the League and asked for tickets, but was told only members could get tickets. So she wrote the League a check and became a member. Later, she showed up at a meeting and asked, "You got my money, so what do you do?" This marked the beginning of a fruitful relationship between Dr. Jefferson Jenkins and the League of Women Voters. She went on to become the 15th president of the League of Women Voters, the first person of African American descent to hold the position. She was also the chair of the League's Education Fund. And in October of 1999, she was even featured in Ebony magazine. And the photos here show the magazine, which is also housed in our collection. So now let's turn to why Dr. Jefferson Jenkins advocates for voting rights. Why is it that Dr. Jefferson Jenkins cares so much about everyone being able to participate in a healthy democracy? What makes democracy so important anyway? She shared her thoughts on this subject in a speech that she gave, which was titled, "Charting the Health of American Democracy and the Effects of Making Democracy Work." She first asks, what is a healthy democracy? It is a place where people feel a sense of belonging and ownership, where they join together to address common concerns. It is a place where citizens are engaged in setting directions for the future, through the ballot box and through myriad other avenues for making one's voice heard. It is a place where citizen participation helps to ensure that all levels of government are responsive to people's needs and aspirations. And why is the health of democracy important? For each of us, the decisions made by our government and in our communities affect our lives deeply. The quality of our children's education, the health care that we receive, the purity of the air that we breathe are all substantially determined by community action and government decisions. Dr. Jefferson Jenkins gets right to the heart of the matter by demonstrating how people's lives are constantly shaped by their government's decisions, which in turn means that the people need to step up to make the government and their democracy work for them. After all, as Dr. Jefferson Jenkins once said, democracy is a promise, not a guarantee. It is a promise that each of us as citizens make to one another, to participate, to debate, to vote. Democracy means engaging in the struggle to find the common good. So, how can people engage in the democratic process? Dr. Jefferson Jenkins addressed this in an interview conducted by C-SPAN in June 2000. So let's hear it in her own words.
I would argue one point with the caller, the voters are the most powerful people here. And if you don't like something or if you want your voice heard, you have to make it heard. The elected officials are supposed to be accountable to you. The bureaucracy results from what the decisions that the elected officials make. We need to begin to give more watchful attention to what our elected officials are doing, what our candidates are saying, and how we're going to hold them accountable. To the point that people keep raising about democracy, we can debate that point forever. It's going to continue to be debated because this is a dynamic, fluid system. The League is often asked in our Global Democracy Initiative to assist emerging democracies, and I always say to people, we're an emerging democracy. We haven't gotten it right yet. We're still working through this. Thomas Jefferson once said that each new generation forges its own relationship with the government. So each new generation is doing just that. And we're at the point now where this generation is trying to forge its relationship with this government. What we need to encourage is that people learn about the process and involve themselves in that process.
Again, engagement is the key. However, historically, many voters have been excluded from engaging in the democratic process. Dr. Jefferson Jenkins discussed the importance of voter inclusion and equality in her speech, From a Quiet Work to a Resounding Noise, The Future of Women in Politics. She made a number of excellent points about how women and people of color were disenfranchised but kept fighting for their vote, including that African American suffragists labored under the double burden of sexism and racism, but they stood firm in their support of the vote. During the 1900s, African American suffrage groups formed throughout the U.S. Also, women of Mexican origin supported the vote, while Native American women could not vote until 1924, when all Native Americans became U.S. citizens. And yet, although the Constitution was changed, bigotry and unjust laws kept many women and men of color from voting for 45 years until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Dr. Jefferson Jenkins went on to say that we want to strengthen our democratic system by making our government more representative. We want Congress to look like the United States. It has been and continues to be a long road towards meeting that goal, which is why the League of Women Voters has remained committed to their work. In this video clip, Dr. Jefferson Jenkins discusses the need to continue the fight for voter equality.
So for 82 years, we have understood the importance of the vote. And I have to share with you, the League of Women Voters was actually founded to, quote, finish the fight. In the first election where women could vote, less than 25% did vote. And those who did vote tended to vote as their husbands told them to. So the League knew that gaining the vote after a 72-year struggle was just the beginning, that there was much more work to do.
And so, the League has continued to fight for equal access to the vote. As Dr. Jefferson Jenkins once pointed out, Some people might conclude that the League's work is done now that women outvote men, but our mission has always been broader. After all, the suffrage movement was not just about gaining the right to vote for women. It was about making our democratic system serve all citizens. It was about giving women say in the government by the people. These goals have not yet been fulfilled. Laws, governmental programs, and policies that affect us all, and sometimes have a disproportionate impact on women, are being written by one segment of the population. Some laws only affect women, and men are writing these laws. You, more than anyone, are in a position to make sure that in the future, women are at the table, writing the laws, setting the policy, indeed setting the government's agenda. That speech was given in 2001, but it just as easily could have been given now in 2021. And that further proves that the League of Women Voters' work is still not finished. There is still a need to advocate for fully equal and inclusive access to and engagement with the democratic process. Moving along, there was another major issue that Dr. Jefferson Jenkins advocated for during her presidency: election reform. She testified before national committees and commissions about the importance of making the voting process uniform and equal. We believe it is important to move toward greater consistency and uniformity in the administration of elections. It is very troubling that some voters are more likely to have their votes count than others, simply because of different error rates with particular voting machines or because of different systems for assisting voters at the polls. Democracy depends upon the informed and active participation of citizens, and especially on the protection of the citizens' right to vote. The League believes that election officials at all levels have a responsibility to encourage voter participation by ensuring citizen confidence in and understanding of the electoral process and providing equal access to the ballot. Election reform was an especially important issue after the problems that were experienced during the 2000 presidential election. Last year's presidential election called the nation's attention to the urgent need for improvements in the methods, practices, and technology through which our elections are administered. Voter registration is a particularly important part of this process. Voter registration is the gateway to participation in our electoral system and the procedural means for preserving a citizen's right to vote. For all citizens, the voter registration process must be accessible and non-discriminatory. Again, Dr. Jefferson Jenkins looks at this issue through the lens of inclusivity. That is the only way that the goal of equality can be achieved, by remaining vigilant and encouraging people to use their votes to make themselves heard. One way that Dr. Jefferson Jenkins and the League of Women Voters reached out to voters to encourage them to vote was through the Wired for Democracy initiative. The League of Women Voters Education Fund designed the project to help local and state leagues across the country experiment with innovative communications methods in order to reach a larger and more diverse population and provide them with nonpartisan information so that they can make informed decisions in the voting booth. And pictured here is a booklet that the League produced that talks about the goals of the Wired for Democracy initiative and discusses what various leagues around the country were doing to increase voter participation. Now, keeping in mind that this initiative was happening during the 1990s, there were a lot of new avenues for the leagues to explore. Many local leagues tried out various projects aimed at using technology to help them educate voters and encourage them to vote. A number of leagues posted information about issues and candidates online on websites, bulletin boards, and databases. Other leagues produced cable programs that could be broadcasted to larger audiences, while still others distributed discs containing candidate and election information to libraries so the general public could access them. And some leagues tried to specifically reach out to various groups, such as students, the elderly, the disabled, and non-English speakers. The league in Alexandria, Virginia, for example, surveyed their Spanish-speaking residents and then produced a Spanish version of its printed voter guide to help address specific concerns that those residents had. As a result of those efforts, the League of Women Voters came to realize that the internet was an especially valuable resource that could be used to educate voters. However, they also realized that they were going to have to assist the voters. While there was a great of information about candidates and issues available on the internet, many people had a difficult time sifting through all of that material to find accurate and understandable information. So the League stepped up to help. Understanding how important it is for voters to have reliable information, the League of Women Voters coordinated with a number of other organizations to come up with a resource that could be used to help address this issue.
And the third area that we're working on that came out of our 1996 survey was that the youth vote is critical to any election. So we are in coalition with about 70 other organizations in a coalition called Youth Vote 2000. And they are mobilizing across this country to try to get young people connected with what's going on. And part of all of what we do is will be coordinated through a website that's called Democracy Network, where you can type in your zip code and get a list of local, state, and federal candidates. But there's also going to be an issues grid that is interactive. So if there's a particular issue that you're interested in, click on that issue and you can find out the information that you know.
The Democracy Net website, a screenshot of which is shown here, turned out to be a successful tool for getting information about candidates and issues out to voters and stimulating conversations about them. And another initiative that Dr. Jefferson Jenkins and the League of Women Voters Education Fund supported was the Get Out the Vote project. Seeing a decline in participation in American elections, the League and other organizations work towards turning the tide of citizen participation, including assisting with registering voters, organizing candidate debates, and using the media to encourage people to go to the polls. Shown here is another item from the Carolyn Jefferson Jenkins collection. It's the cover of a binder that contains information about the Get Out the Vote project that was distributed to local leagues to assist them with their efforts. Here, Dr. Jefferson Jenkins discusses the impact that having people to talk to about candidates and issues has on whether or not people vote, and how that led to the League of Women Voters recrafting their message in their Get Out the Vote activities.
In 1996, we did a survey comparing voters and non-voters, and our hypothesis was that non-voters were more cynical than voters. Not really. Non-voters turned out to be just as cynical as voters. But there were other distinguishing factors. One, non-voters felt that they did not have enough information to make an informed decision. Two, non-voters did not have a history or tradition of voting within their immediate family and or work community. And thirdly, non-voters did not see that the issues that were being discussed had an impact on their day-to-day lives. As a result of those findings, we had to recraft our message in our 1996 Get Out the Vote activities. And we shifted away from you as a citizen having an impact on the system to the fact that the people who are elected are going to have an impact on you. Those issues that are most important to you, your child's education, your health care, your Social Security, your taxes, are being decided by someone. And the people that are deciding these issues did not just wake up in Washington. Somebody voted for them to get there. And they live in your local community. So what we did was target 25 areas nationally where our local leagues worked with specific precincts and specific community-based organizations to try and improve the voter turnout. And in each of those targeted areas, there was a 3% to 13% increase in voting. And let me tell you what we did, and I had the opportunity to participate in some of the practical pieces of that. We did precinct walks. We knocked on people's doors and said, do you know what some of the issues are? We weren't encouraging them to choose a candidate. We weren't encouraging them to make a decision. We just want to share with you, here are the issues. And yes, they do impact your life. You are participating in government, which was one of the excuses I don't participate in government. Yes, you do. You can be an inactive participant, but you do participate because somebody cleans your streets, somebody picks up your trash, somebody makes the rules about where your kids go to school. So once we recrafted the message so that they could see the impact on their day-to-day lives. And because we had a personal contact with people, they actually did go out to vote.
The success of the Get Out the Vote activities was inspirational, and the League of Women Voters built upon that foundation in their next campaign. For the 2000 election, the League of Women Voters initiated the Take a Friend to Vote campaign in an attempt to continue to increase civic participation in voting. And pictured here are a couple of bumper stickers that can be found in our collection, which promote the initiative and encourage people to vote. Here, Dr. Jefferson Jenkins discusses the Take a Friend to Vote campaign, which built upon the Get Out the Vote initiative.
For this 2000 election, to build upon that, we will be announcing the initiation of a Take a Friend to Vote campaign. We are encouraging people across this country to take one other person with them to vote, but before you do that, have a conversation with that person so that the decision that they make is an informed decision.
Again, the emphasis of this campaign was placed on stimulating conversations about the candidates and issues as a way to encourage people to vote, especially people who may not have had a history of voting. And this is what helped the campaign to be successful. One last major issue that Dr. Jefferson Jenkins often advocated for was campaign finance reform. Here she discusses how campaign finance reform is a civil rights issue.
My final comments before I close center around campaign finance reform. And those of you who know the League know that I cannot leave unless I say something about the passage of campaign finance reform. Last year, there was an interesting symposium at Howard that characterized campaign finance reform as a civil rights issue, and it is. One of the items that disengages voters is that they don't see themselves represented in the electorate. And if you don't see yourself there, you don't envision yourself as a part of what's going on. When you talk about campaign finance reform, it favors incumbents. The incumbents don't necessarily reflect the demographics of the nation. We have to pass campaign finance reform in order to give more people access to the process, not just at the local level, but at the national level.
Dr. Jefferson Jenkins reminds her listeners to always look at issues through the lens of civil rights. It's important to have that perspective because it reminds voters to continue to work towards using their power to make things equal for all people. Now, let's talk about some of Dr. Jefferson Jenkins's major publications. Dr. Jefferson Jenkins has contributed her writings to numerous journals and books over the years. However, the works she is best known for include The Road to Black Suffrage, One Man, One Vote, The History of the African American Vote in the United States, and The Untold Story of Women of Color in the League of Women Voters. One Man, One Vote is an especially noteworthy work. We have a copy of it in our collection, and the image you see here is the front cover of the book, which features a photo of Frederick Douglass. The League of Women Voters of Cleveland set out in 1988 to write a 25-page pamphlet for educators to use as a resource on the history of Black voters, targeting teenagers and Blacks who are underrepresented at the polls. However, the project expanded beyond this original intention. This was discussed in an article that appeared in the Call and Post in 1992. As Jefferson, the principal author of the project, began to collect data and information in bits and pieces, the contributions and struggles of the African American to find a place as a franchised citizen began to accumulate into book form. One Man, One Vote pulls this information together into one source, saving the reader the trip to find the facts from a line in one history book and a paragraph in another. Calling upon the words of the past leaders, Jefferson has brought the struggle to the forefront through the poetry of speeches and anecdotes, through the pain and endurance of those who lived in the oppression of the past. The road to publication, however, was not a smooth one. There was one major obstacle that had to be overcome. There were some difficulties in securing funding for the publication of One Man, One Vote, because one funder found the nature of the book volatile, but Jefferson Jenkins refused to change the book. Truth is truth. It's unfortunate, said Jefferson, who witnessed and was inspired by her grandmother, who fought to register voters in Arkansas in the face of Jim Crow laws that prohibited Blacks from voting because they could not read, did not own property, or other roadblocks at the polls. My grandmother passed all the requirements and still could not vote, simply because she was Black, stated Jefferson. Her grandmother did not cast her first vote until she was 63. I've been voting longer than she has. I never take my vote for granted, nor will I. And because Dr. Jefferson Jenkins stuck to her guns, One Man, One Vote was eventually published. And this brings us to Dr. Jefferson Jenkins's latest work, The Untold Story of Women of Color in the League of Women Voters, the cover of which is pictured here. The book was released on February 29th, 2020. It is structured to show the progression of the relationship between the League of Women Voters and its members of color, as manifested in changes to its policies, practices, symbols, and messaging. It begins with the suffrage movement and continues until the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the League, and uses actual correspondence, convention minutes, existing League histories, and personal accounts to tell the League story. And for anyone who is interested in learning more about the League of Women Voters, I would say that this book is an excellent resource. Finally, what is Dr. Jefferson Jenkins doing now? She continues to write and speak at events to advocate for voter rights, civic engagement, fighting against voter oppression and discrimination, etc. She's also currently serving as an adjunct assistant professor at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And she works with educational organizations, nonprofits, community-based organizations, and policymakers as a consultant in the areas of leadership, policy, and practice. And on March 12th, 2020, Dr. Jefferson Jenkins was awarded the Freedom Summer of '64 Award from Miami University. The award honors leaders who strive to advance civil rights and social justice in America, which she has certainly done, and her award was well deserved. Also, Dr. Jefferson Jenkins will be the commencement speaker for Miami University's Spring 2021 graduating class, and we are looking forward to welcoming her and hearing her speak for us. And on that note, thank you all for your attention. If you have questions or would like to learn more about Dr. Carolyn Jefferson Jenkins or any of our other collections, please feel free to reach out to us, and our website and email address are listed for you here on the screen.